All right, so capital punishment, also known as the death penalty, is a very controversial topic, especially in this day and age. And my opponent's claim was that the death penalty is an ineffective punishment in the United States. And his 3 points were the death penalty fails to prevent people from committing crimes, that sometimes the death penalty leads to more crime, and that the death penalty fails as a retributive punishment. And my response is that his speech was very ineffective in proving his claim. His first point, that the death penalty fails to prevent people from committing crimes. He did cite a source that said they found no correlation between the death penalty and a decreasing amount of crime. And he also stated that no evidence at all has been found that the death penalty reduces crime. And, well, this simply isn't true. At best, the evidence is mixed on the subject. For example, a scientific report by the American Law and Economics Association, they stated that our most conservative estimate is that the execution of each offender seems to save, on average, the lives of 18 potential victims. So that right there clashes with his evidence, and it shows that, well, there is other evidence on the other side. He also stated that out of 25 states with the most crime, 20 of them have the death penalty, and he uses this to support his claim. But I think he's kind of jumping to conclusions there. You could make a number of conclusions about this piece of evidence. For example, I could make the conclusion that perhaps these states have more crime due to many, many factors, and that they have the death penalty in an attempt to curb that amount of crime. And this brings me to the second point, that sometimes the death penalty leads to more crime. And his only support for this is a few cases of murderers who will commit heinous acts in order to get the death penalty brought upon them as a form of suicide. And his source claimed that only 22 people, there were 22 cases of this being found. Now, out of thousands of violent crime in the world and the thousands of people on death row, 22 cases of this in total is not a very big number, and I think it just doesn't hold as a support for the entire second claim. Now, the third claim, similarly, the death penalty fails as a retributive punishment. There was very little, the arguments were a little shaky on this point. One of his evidences was that more death row inmates are asking are volunteering for the death penalty. And while that may be true, the source he cited found that 75 death row inmates volunteered over the course of nearly 10 years. The NAACP, in a report from 2017, found that there are about 2,800 total death row inmates in the United States. So 75 inmates volunteering over the course of nearly 10 years, it's a very small percentage of those people. And it doesn't quite support the fact that, these people don't fear the death penalty, or that, most of them want it to be put upon them. And his other piece of evidence for this claim was that California doesn't execute, or it executes very little of its death row inmates, a small percentage of them, and most of them never get the death penalty put upon them. And I don't dispute that this is true, but if it is true, it doesn't really attest to anything about the death penalty itself. It doesn't really prove that the death penalty is ineffective. It really only says that, well, California maybe isn't giving out the death penalty as much as what was originally intended. So overall, my opponent's speech gave little indication that the death penalty is ineffective.
All right, the structural stuff is all sound. On the first point, you've got some challenge to the advocate's evidence on that particular point. You've got a contrary piece of evidence that suggests that there is an impact. So at worst, it's a wash. The advocate's position is that it has no effect, and your position is that a lot of people believe it has an effect, and there's plenty of evidence that suggests it has an effect. Your challenge to the way the advocate reasoned on the state-by-state comparison was okay. I thought that was reasonable. You had one good explanation about why the conclusion might not be the way the advocate's talking about. That's a reasonable press that you have on that point. On the second point, you diminish the significance of this particular point. 22 people out of hundreds or thousands who were attempting to get killed. I think one of the things that you might point out, of course, is that your chances of being executed are relatively small, even if you do get convicted. And so if their real goal is to die, that this is the least effective method that they could find. There are plenty of other ways to be committing suicide. This seems like it's a strange way to accomplish that objective, but I like the numerical press as well on that point. And you kind of have the same sort of issue on the third point, suggesting that people, the notion that it doesn't serve as retribution. Well, retribution is all being looked at from the perspective of the accused here, or the person who's convicted. Retribution is often expressed by the state, by the victims, by the society and the criminal justice system, and the notion that somebody is, that retribution hasn't been taken place. I think there's a larger context to that, and I think you miss making that argument, and you kind of stick with the specifics of their case, which again, it's a good numbers press. It's perfectly fine. Okay, thank you.